last week, a friend of mine asked me, "So, Wendy, when are you going to start talking about sobriety on the channel?" And I said, I think one of the biggest things we have to combat when we're talking about addiction is misinformation. There's a lot of assumptions and misinformation out there about addiction, about alcoholism. And I think the first place to start before diving into combating and talking about sobriety and the steps and the journey and how difficult it is giving factual information about addiction, what it is, what the characteristics are. And so, welcome to this episode of The Wandering Wanderer. I'm your host, Wendy, and today I want us to explore the types of alcoholics. But before I get into that, I want to give a huge shout out to my 60 subscribers. Yo, we got to 60 subscribers. I'm so excited. There's like 60 people who watch and comment and give me feedback on all of my episodes. And I'm so grateful to you. It means so much to me. Starting this channel, I don't know if I thought I'd even get 5. So getting 60 is a huge deal. Thank you so much for your time. It means a lot to me. Growing up, we were told time is money. And so I know you taking time out of your day to listen to me and watch these episodes is taking a part of your day to spend with me, and I absolutely appreciate it. And today's episode, I'm going to start with a story before I dive into all the into all the facts and details and data. I remember a couple of years ago, we were celebrating New Year's at a family friend's house, and there's this young lady, not a family member, but she'd been invited, and we were all drinking. It's New Year's, like you got a party, right? And we had music going on and stuff. There's all sorts of alcohol in the house, and I remember there was a whiskey, and I remember she said that she'd never drank whiskey before in her life, and she had some. Now, for those of you who don't drink or those who don't drink whiskey, it's an acquired taste, but sort of once you start getting, used to the flow of how smooth it can go down, it can be a bit deceptive, right? And so at some point, she lay down, and she had taken quite a bit. And she lay down and she literally started having convulsions. And we were there, like we're all looking, we're like, oh my God, what's wrong with her? Is she sick? Does she have epilepsy or whatever? And it was just an extreme case of alcohol poisoning. And I remember being, like we're all standing around, somebody's trying to lift her up, somebody's holding her up, somebody's trying to give her some water and all of that. And I remember how scary it felt, because I was like, oh my God, what if something happens to this young lady in this home, and we all try and figure out. And, eventually she was fine. We got her up. She had just drunk a little too much whiskey, and she'd never drunk whiskey in her life before. And so she had a really adverse effect to it. And I was reflecting on this the other day, and I realized that a lot of the times I went out or hung out with when we went out and we went drinking, we saw versions of this in one way or another. I think every weekend, if you go out, you see a version of this. You see somebody who is completely drunk and no, I don't want to say falling over, but you get worried a little bit about them because they look like they're not okay, and eventually they're fine. And I think this is a good segue into the topic I want us to talk about today, which is the types of alcoholics. Now, something to be said is these categories are rather broad, right? Because research is continuing into addiction, and there's still so much we don't know, and there's still so much we're still recovering, right? And so we're learning, as we learned last week, that there are different types of alcoholics. And more, we're learning that it's such a complex condition and has a lot of factors that influence development and presentation of addiction. And so what we're going to talk about today is rather broad, right? It's a broad segment, and it's accepted classification currently, but continues to change. And these subtypes, as they're called, are based on behaviors, are based on characteristics. And so as we go into these, look around, look into yourself. I'm really big on reflection. So when you hear me talk about reflection, I sit a lot of times and think to myself, and I'm like, how could I have made that situation better? Or how can I be better now that I know better? Like when Maya Angelou said, when you know better, do better. And so as I go through this, I want you to think about the person that you think might have a problematic relationship with alcohol, or maybe it's yourself. Think about what category you fall into and how what makes you think you fall into that category. And so the first of those categories that I'm going to speak about today is the young adult subtype. Now, we've already established that, a lot of people drink before they're 18, before they're adults. In the US, it's 21, but we all know a lot of people drink before that age. But assuming that we all don't drink until we are of legal age, the first rather wide subtype is the young adult subtype. This includes people who start drinking at the age of 18, 19, or early adulthood. They are influenced by peer pressure because everyone around them is drinking, social norms because that's what you do on a weekend, or they desire to experiment. They've seen other people drinking and they want to see what it's like. They may not, because they're young. When we're young, we think we're invisible, right? And so when we're young, you don't initially experience social or financial consequences, right? Because most of the time somebody else is buying the booze, or your social circle is comprised of people who drink with you. And so there is no initial stigma. In fact, at that age, everybody is welcome you to drink. It is a rite of passage. Like when you get to 18, you're supposed to be drinking, right? Like your uncles, your cousins are actually the ones who are going to take you out for like your first drink. And so at this initial stage, there is no consequence. You don't see social or financial consequences, although it might lead to impaired academic and occupational performance. Hangover, anybody? It might also include strained relationships with coworkers or, people you share a place with. I'm thinking about college students here, but if you share housing and all of that, it can lead to strained relationships because it's, reckless behavior comes along with drunkenness. It might, in some places in the world, lead to legal issues if you get into fights or if you find yourself driving drunk. It might get this particular subgroup into legal issues. I am more of as I go further into the sobriety journey, I feel like this is the best age at which to start interventions. Because at this age, it's encouraged to drink. It's like, yes, go ahead, that's life. It's a part you got to go through, because if you don't go through it, you're going to do it when you're much older and all of that. But I think this is where the seeds of addiction are planted, because when your entire weekend is all about drinking, when your entire social circle is almost monopolized by events that include drinking and no other activities are sort of encouraged or all of that, the seeds for addiction are planted. And scientifically, it is said that the brain continues to develop until 25, 26. And that's when somebody should actually be considered an adult and not 18, which means the brain chemistry continues to be affected by continuous drinking. And I think the interventions need to begin at a lot younger age, not when people get to their 30s and they're now like really struggling before the interventions happen. I think we need to start offering education about alcoholism and coping mechanisms when people turn 18, because I think when you become an adult, you realize being an adult is a sham. You're better off when you're younger and your parents are paying all the bills and you don't have to worry about it. Growing up is hard. Becoming responsible for yourself is hard. And alcohol offers such a tempting out to temporarily get away from all of that. And I think that's one of the biggest things where the seeds begin to be planted of, alcohol is your friend, when, to be quite frank, it is not. And this usually escalates so that by the time this particular group gets to 24, 25, 26, their coping mechanism is almost entirely alcohol-based, which, of course, does not help anybody. The second type is the young antisocial subtype. Now, this is the same as the first group, only that this group of people are more of the rebellious, angry, more prone to get into fights kind of group, and alcohol just fuels it. And so they're already rebellious, they're already antisocial, they're already feeling like it's me against the world. And then you pour alcohol into this particular fire and they just take off. And then, so the antisocial behaviors then mix with the alcohol. And I do not have to tell you, the results of that are really a little disastrous. And then, so conduct unbecoming becomes something that happens almost every weekend. It's the kind that, when parents of this group of people receive a call, and they're told, oh, we're calling about your son. And you're like, what has he done now? Or we're calling about your daughter. And like, what has she done now? Because the antisocial behavior paired with the alcohol just makes a bad situation very, very unfortunate. So alcohol in this case just serves to make those behaviors a little bit more, because as we know, alcohol makes you more confident. So if you're already feeling aggressive and you're already feeling like I'm at the top of the world, everybody else is against me, then you begin to feel more macho. Like when you drink alcohol, you feel a little more macho and you get on the top of that particular hill and you're ready to die on it, literally and figuratively. Yeah. Treatment for this subtype requires addressing both the antisocial behavior, what the cause of the antisocial behavior is, and the alcohol use. And this is where therapy, and somebody pointed out to me the other day that not everybody can afford therapy. You're right. Not everybody can afford therapy. But a lot of times around us, whether it's religious organizations or non-governmental organizations, more and more around you, you will find places where you can get support and you can get help without needing to pay for it. You might need to look a little bit harder in some places than in others, but help is available. This particular group needs a little bit more of an intervention because you have to deal with what's actually underlying cause of the antisocial behavior that alcohol just exaggerates a little bit more. And so the third category of the third subtype, as we say, is a functional subtype. This one I don't even need a script to talk about because this was me. Where this category is those of us who, as much as we have a problem with alcohol, we are able to maintain a facade of normalcy in our daily lives. We have steady jobs, we maintain relationships, we fulfill all our social obligations, and it truly masks the severity of our drinking problem. But over time, we see the consequences of negative alcohol use. And that's when we start having health issues, strained relationship, decreased productivity, and a myriad of other issues. And I think this one is personal for me because for the longest time, and as I shared a couple of episodes ago, that when I finally started facing that I might have an alcohol issue, a lot of people told me, they were like, Wendy, I didn't know you had a problem. I didn't think you had a problem. A friend of mine once even told me, I think I was a couple of months into sobriety, and my colleague, she is a friend, and we used to work together. And she said, Wendy, everybody just used to say you drank a lot, but I didn't really think like it was a problem. I'm proud of you for stopping drinking, but I never really thought you had a problem. And so functional alcoholics, we succeed at that. We make it look like it's a no-brainer. We have a problem, and for most of us, until that functionality is no longer working for us, when those problems begin to manifest, and that's when we start having health issues, or when other people start calling us out on our behavior, or we're unable to function, we can't do what we've been doing so excellently. For a lot of us, that's when you kind of start looking around and you're like, okay, maybe I might have a problem. I didn't know, but maybe I might have a problem. But as long as we're functioning, as long as we feel like, hey, I'm not missing work, I'm not doing any of that. As long as you're functioning and you're almost functioning at overcapacity, if I may call it that, you do not feel like you have a problem. Now, intervention for this particular group is a little trickier because denial. We when I say we, I'm talking about myself and other functional alcoholics. Until we get to the point where we think we have a problem, convincing us or trying to point out that we have a problem is incredibly difficult. We will deny it, we will rationalize it, we will justify it until it gets to the point where we can't do it anymore. And then we're like, oh, you know what? Maybe these folks have a point. Maybe the people who love and care for me are seeing something that I am not. But in my opinion, this is one of the hardest groups to make an intervention for, because just admitting they have a problem is incredibly difficult. All right. The interventions for this include education, but again, as I said, they have got to get to the point of realizing they have a problem and wanting to develop healthier habits, health, and better coping mechanisms. Because a lot of the times it's a coping mechanism to deal with life, right? Life is lifing, adulting is adulting, and alcohol just seems like a warm refuge all the time that never denies you, never rejects you, always loves you, is always there for you, and a good place to just kind of temporarily put your issues down for a little bit. Unfortunately, the longer term effects are worse than that temporary relief that you get. Developing healthier coping mechanisms is just a better option for all of us, not just those who are addicted to alcohol, but also those who are battling other sorts of addictions. The fourth type that I can also relate to are those who are almost genetically predisposed to alcoholism. And those are those people who come from families where alcoholism runs across generations. The reason I can relate to it is because my father was an alcoholic. And so there are times that I ask myself whether I was just born to be an alcoholic. And that's one of the things, we're going to discuss in the next episode is genetics one of those things that determines whether somebody's going to become an alcoholic or not? And so this type, they are the familial subtype, and they are connected to alcoholism because of genetics. Research is still ongoing as to whether if you have alcoholics in the family, you're predisposed to it genetically. But there is research that supports this notion that if you have alcoholism in your family as a problem, chances are future generations are going to have a problem with alcoholism as well. Interventions for this particular group is difficult because not everybody who comes from a family with alcoholics ends up being an alcoholic. But raising awareness earlier is incredibly important because it makes people more aware and more likely to make an effort at being more conscious in making their decisions. And I think just, when we say apples don't fall far from trees, I think this is where this category of people need this information earlier on, and how susceptible they might be to addiction and why they need to be a little bit more careful as they grow older, as they become adults, as to their use of alcohol. The fifth subtype is the chronic subtype. These individuals are the ones who suffer from the most debilitating form of alcoholic use disorder. Now, remember when we were talking a couple of weeks ago and I said, when you think of an alcoholic, what do you think? And we're talking about people who fall down drunk, people who, when you just see them, they're always reeking of alcohol. Like, from the moment you see them, they're high, whether it's 8 o'clock in the morning or 10 p.m. at night, right? And these are the people who have chronically been using alcohol, long-standing, and they have a myriad of physical, psychological, and social problems that everybody can see. This is the village drunkard, right? This is the person who everybody just discards and says, if I say it in Swahili, huyo ni mlevi, that one is a drunkard. Like, they're just written off because their symptoms are so evident to everyone who can see it. And by the time they get to this level, these people already have a myriad of health problems, liver issues, cognitive impairment, and they're more likely to get into accidents, even home accidents that increase their mortality rate. These people need, this group of, or this subtype of people needs a more intensive intervention, long-term, that includes cognitive therapy, detoxification. And when I shared that I quit almost cold turkey, for this group, this is the most dangerous time for them to try and quit cold turkey. It's incredibly difficult because their body has developed so much dependence and tolerance that they need assistance in every single facet for them to be able to free themselves from alcoholism. There's another subtype, and I think this subtype is where a lot of us sort of fall into without realizing it. And this is the binge drinking subtype. Now, I think when I was younger, 18, 19, this is what you do. You start drinking Friday, you're drinking to Saturday and Sunday, and then the whole week you don't drink. But whenever you're drinking, you're almost binging. It's like multiple copious amount of alcohol over time, like over a short period of time. And the example I gave earlier is, I would say the young lady that I was talking about would fall into this subtype without knowing too much about her, is where you drink so much in such a short amount of time, leading to acute intoxication. And while this group doesn't drink daily, this binge drinking poses significant risks to health and safety. This sort of drinking is associated with a heightened risk of accidents, injuries, blackouts, alcohol poisoning. As I said when I started the story, I told you how for a second there, not for a second, almost for like half an hour, we were really afraid that this young woman was not going to come out of this okay. And this alcohol poisoning is because your body has just consumed a massive amount of alcohol in a very short amount of time. For this group, the initial interventions would be reduction strategies, responsible drinking, increasing awareness, and addressing underlying triggers for why they feel they need to drink so much in such a short amount of time. Now, the challenge with this is, denial, because when you first tell somebody, oh, don't drink so much, and it's just a weekend, they're like, yeah, well, it's just a weekend and I'm just having fun. And that's where these conversations need to be had. It is, why does fun have to be associated with binge drinking? Why does fun have to be associated with, getting to the point where you're no longer responsible for your own decisions because it's literally out of your hands because you have no control over it? And so in summary, these subtypes provide a foundational understanding of the many ways that alcoholism can look like, or how it can present itself, and how we can intervene, or how we can help people or guide people within each subtype, because treatment of each group is extremely different. And each subcategory, dare I say, each individual needs a tailor-made approach to help them during recovery. I'm curious about what you think. Do you think that I have covered all the subtypes, or do you think the other subtypes that I've missed out on? Comment below. I'd like to hear a lot more about what you think about the subtypes and about the different people who drink and how they drink and how they spend time drinking. I'd like to hear your opinions about what, as a society, this looks like. And so with that, I am going to wrap up this episode. And thank you all for joining me. If you'd like to keep wondering with me, please join me next week as we explore a new area of alcoholism and addiction. If you have musings, thoughts, ideas, questions, comment, send me your feedback, and I'll get back to you. And maybe if you give me a topic to discuss, we'll air it on the channel. I would love to tell your stories, and so please let me know. Reach out to me if you have a story and you want to share, if you have an experience that you want to talk to us about. And more on that, I'll catch up with you next week. Have a wonderful rest of your week. And once again, thank you so much for joining me and giving me your time. Catch you later.